network is everything.
Yep.
More than your technical skill, even though your technical skill, obviously, when you get in, you're going to have to do it. But the network is everything. And you have to be, if you're a natural, networker, like I suspect, probably we all are, we have to gain a certain discipline about what we're doing with the network that we're building or that we naturally have. You have to be much more deliberate about looking at how people can help you further your goals. Don't be Machiavellian about it, but certainly understand what you're doing. And if you are not a natural outgoer, then make it your activities outcome based. And I'm saying this because networking is so important. It is what has sustained me in business and is accelerating my business success because I'm understanding that principle more.
Welcome to another episode of the Pepper Tube Salt Show. Today we have a special guest with us. His resume is a lot. Don't know. It's reboot resume. It's so much. I just had to say a lot. Don't know how the best way to introduce our special guest, but the gist of it, he came from the lawyer space and moved to tech, and now is a leader in that space here in Philly. And we'll just hand it off to him to introduce himself.
Sure. I will keep it brief. So Kahiga Tiagha, trained as a lawyer. You're right. I pivoted to tech in 2015. I now run, my own firm. It's really a tech staffing and training firm. I'm born to African parents, born in the United States, but to African parents who came over, who were studying here. So as I mentioned, my father's from Cameroon. My mother was Kenyan. And so my brothers and I were born here. And then it was always my parents' plan to return to Africa, just to expose us to back home. And so I went back when I was pretty young, 6, spent some time first in Kenya. My grandparents on the farm, went to school for a semester there, went to Cameroon. And it was just my mother. My father was finishing off his studies here. And so we were in Cameroon for about a year and a half before my dad came. And then from that point, lived in Cameroon, went to boarding school. So really got kind of the full African experience of doing primary school there, went to boarding school there. And then thankfully, my mother got a job with the United Nations. And so that gave us the opportunity to go to school abroad. So that's how we really came back to here. My brothers came to the States. I went to England, did undergrad in England. Always knew I was coming here for law school, for grad school. I ultimately went to law school. And so that was the beginning of me coming back to the States. And then I came to Philly because I started practicing here. But, I could go on for another while. But yeah.
Well, what an interesting background, man. It's like I'm hearing your accent because I know I have an accent, but your accent is like a mix of British, American, and African a little bit. So what was that like growing up with parents? One, you say one is from Kenya, your mom, right?
That's right.
And then your dad was from Cameroon.
Yep.
And it's almost like two sides of the continent.
That's right.
The opposite side of the continent, am I right?
Truly, very much so. Cameroon is near Nigeria.
Right.
Kenya is all the other east side. That's right.
So what was that experience like? Did you feel like at some point you had to because both cultures are very different. How do you find yourself in coming from two parents who come from two part of the continent, different culture?
I think because I grew up in Cameroon, you asked earlier, which side do I feel like? I would say I definitely, when I was younger, felt more Cameroonian just because we're there. But frankly, as mothers do, they have quite a lot of influence on the household.
Right.
I mentioned to you guys, my name is Kahiga. That's the Kenyan name, so, an African family, firstborn gets named after the father's side. So secondborn, at least in the culture that my parents agreed to, I was named after, my mother's side of the family. So I'd always inherently felt a connection to the Kenyan side as well. So now I feel connection with both. I was just saying that it really depends on the audience and who's asking the question. But I've spent time in both countries, very close to both my parents. But being at home, I would say that there was an element of, they did not want us to necessarily be biased towards one culture. So I don't speak, for example, my African, my Cameroonian native tongue,
Right.
or my Kenyan native tongue, right? I mean, I can get by when I go to the village, but we don't, because we spoke English at home.
Wow.
So that's sort of one of the rules that I guess they must have decided on, because we didn't learn any of the.
That's just so interesting, because the reason why I'm just so curious about your background,
Please.
Again, it's like, you know, Toby's from Nigeria, I'm from Guinea,
Yep.
and you know, and so what's happening now? You get a lot of like, you know, just like African just marrying from different part of the continent,
from
right?
backgrounds.
So just to see you, like, you know,
Right.
you kind of like like, you know,
Oh, hey, it happened back in the day. Yeah, I
Right,
think it's a
so-
function of,
Right.
you know, New York, right? Being a melting pot.
Yeah,
They were
yeah.
both, they met they were both, no, my mother was a scholarship from her government doing her
Right.
master's here.
what?
My father was sponsored by an American who was in Cameroon for the Peace Corps. And that's how he really kind of got, not necessarily, he was already in high school, but that's how he got the path to know about America and apply and go to New York. But they met basically in International House in New York.
Wow.
So he was at CCNY, she was at Columbia, and then they met there and then started dating. So,
Wow.
so I think meeting here too probably had a big part of, you know, how they met in the first place.
Right.
And then how, you know, we were.
And then you say you you had an experience of like growing up in different like countries like England
Yep.
and all that in America. Like how did that sort of, you know, how did that experience sort of like shaped the person that you are today and your
Yeah.
view of the world?
Sure. So I think being born in America always gave me, or gave us as a family, a sense of you can always move around. You know, just because we went back to Africa and that's the longest place I lived before coming back to Philly, to Cameroon and Kenya and all that. You know, I think it just gave us a sense that there was always a place to go. You know?
Right.
But I think Cameroon was really the place where I was anchored. You know, my formative experience, how I kind of saw the world for a long time, was because of the primary school and the secondary school experience there. You know, it's just all of the relationships that you build. You know, I don't know whether you gentlemen went to school back home, but you know, you can imagine how formative it is. But in terms of how it has, and then going to England was a function again of my mother deciding that being a civil servant in Cameroon was not going to necessarily lead to the future that we all wanted.
Right.
So, you know, she applied, got a job with the United Nations, sort of pulled my father along after the fact. So, you know, being a woman leading the family back then. So even living in Ethiopia, that's another place where we lived for a while.
Wow.
There was a civil war going on back then. This is back in the 90s, just to kind of date myself. So,
Wow.
you know, it's going on. And then that allowed me to start going to school in England and then here. So really what it allows me to do is just be highly adaptable, right? So just being in any environment, being able to be culturally flexible, culturally competent,
Right.
knowing when to fall back, knowing when to, you know, to
Right.
go forward, that kind of thing.
Wow. You know, I you know, sometimes when you meet people, like your experience is more so like I'm just intrigued by it. Because you know, it's just like it's so interesting because I know it has so much influence on how the work that you do today. So talk a little bit about like, you know, you say that transition, right? Sure. Before we jump into your organization, we kind of want to get a little bit of background on. Sure. So what were you doing prior to jumping into tech?
Yeah, so my formal training is as an attorney. So I went to law school down in DC, George Washington Law School.
Wow.
And, you know, I'm an attorney largely because, you know, I think a lot of Africans will understand this, you know, doctor, lawyer, engineer, right? So because I, you know, wrote well and spoke well, being a lawyer was my option, although I was inherently interested in being a lawyer. So from law school, I was intending to be a criminal defense lawyer. I did well enough to interview at law firms and realize that, you know, being a corporate lawyer at a large law firm paid much better than being a criminal defense lawyer.
Oh, yeah, it pays out.
So I made a cold, hard decision around the cash and, you know, basically started my career here in Philadelphia working for, you know, large law firms called Bowles Spar.
I think the difference is it's like this. Being a criminal defense lawyer and working at it's almost like if you're working at a corporate law firm, it's like you get this big check, but they take no taxes out of it. But if you are a criminal defense lawyer, that's almost like, well, you got a check and they just take all the taxes out of it.
You better have a good accountant.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, you better have a good accountant.
So, but there's a huge sort of change in terms of like the salary, right? But not a lot of us do it. So we want to push you a little bit more, like, how long were you sort of practicing law? And then how did you come to just make that sort of change, right? Because it was a small defining moment in your life? Or did you reach a point in your life where you like, you know what? This is not something that I want to do for the rest of my life, because going to law school requires a lot of training, like you say. It's not easy. It's a serious discipline to get through law school, to take the bar, and not to be licensed to practice. And then you come to this point in your life where you're like, I don't want to do this anymore.
That's right.
Yep, exactly. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of my background. So I still have my law license.
Right, of course.
I graduated from law school back in 2000, maybe some of you, before some of you were born. But I practiced law for 16 years. I did 6 years in big law. So I did kind of mergers and acquisitions work, which is buying and selling kind of big public companies. And then I ran my own law firm in Philadelphia, Center City, Philadelphia, for 10 years.
Wow.
And so, I was a good lawyer, and it's kind of proven objectively. You can sort of look me up and see that. But the actual practice of law itself, I didn't really enjoy. And I can go into that for another reason, just in terms of people who are considering legal careers.
Right.
So part of it was, just knowing that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but as I practiced more and more, I realized I don't necessarily think that I want to be a lawyer entrepreneur. I know that I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know that. How did I come to that? You asked, were there specific moments? Yes, there were, but they happened over time. The first was working for Ballard Spar in the city of Philadelphia. At the time when I started working for myself, I believed was going to give me a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Let me give you an equivalent. It's like working for Goldman Sachs and then going to start a financial firm. Right. You would assume that Goldman Sachs would somehow give you a competitive market, competitive spot. And what I realized was, and again, it might have been my fault because I was a young entrepreneur, but people were not just falling down and saying, oh, you work there. Let me give you my business. Like, get out. There were people who were basically, they weren't impressed. I had to do more than just sell them on that, which was alarming because I thought that would be a differentiator. The second was just the sheer number of lawyers that were graduating from law school and coming into, I didn't realize I had these on, sorry, gentlemen. The sheer amount of lawyers that were graduating from law school. And just to give you context, so my bar ID number is in the 80,000s, which means that all of the lawyers in Pennsylvania that had graduated law school from the beginning of time, there were only 80,000 when I graduated. Wow. Now I think the number in less than 20 years is in the 200,000s.
Wow.
Which means that they've added 140,000 lawyers in the last 20 years, whereas there were only 80,000 that graduated in, say, the first 100 years of. So it just shows you how concentrated the field was coming. And I remember, like, the people that I was hiring, the lawyers, when you start looking at their bar ID cards, it's like 130,000, 160,000. I'm like, how many people are graduating from law school? So just the sheer number, how saturated the market was getting relative to, being a practitioner. And then the third thing that made me really realize that I was in a commodity business rather than in any kind of, like, I wasn't offering any kind of differentiated product. There's so many lawyers. You could leave my office and go down literally to the next building and go and comparison shop on price alone. The third thing that made me realize it is I was at an event, and this is when I started moving towards tech. I was beginning to represent some startups in the area, and they were being run by Black people. So I was really kind of interested in that. But I went to an event. There was a startup there, and their lawyer was a gentleman who had graduated from law school 2 years ago. And I think I was in my 13th or 14th year of practice.
Wow.
And this was a startup that was being funded, that had gotten some traction. And I thought to myself, if a startup that has that amount of traction is relying on a second year lawyer as their general counsel, that means that literally me being in my 13th or 14th year, that's usually a client that I would get. But if they're going to a second year, that means that literally there is no distinction in the marketplace between being 14 years, having done all the sophisticated work,
Right.
and somebody. Now, again, the second year lawyer might have been very experienced, but traditionally, a lawyer would not have been retained, of that experience would not have been retained by a lawyer like that. So it's just very interesting. Saying, once I saw that second year lawyer representing a client of that magnitude, I realized that the law in Philadelphia as a solo practice or as someone who was running their own practice was really a commodity, and I needed to find some way to get out of it. And so the clients that were tech clients began to show me that tech was a much more open space as compared to the law, and that's why I began to consider it.
Nice.
So I got a couple questions. So in the tech space, there's a lot of ways, you can get involved. And then as you migrate, actually I'm making an assumption right now, is the item your first venture into tech, or was there some steps before that?
No, it was my first venture. And it was I really see it as an opportunity. So as I'm making this transition, realizing that the writing's on the wall in terms of being able to run a legal practice and make any margins, I'm beginning to experience a natural pivot in my practice where I am representing more and more tech companies, but more of those companies are being run by young Black people. And so I'm realizing, okay, I'm a young Black person. There are young Black people running these things. Let me at least explore. And in those conversations, I began to realize not only what their businesses were doing, but just tech writ large, like what was happening in the tech sector. And one of the things that was happening was tech was growing. The narrative was tech was growing exponentially, and they are hurting for people. And I've always been a social impact professional, meaning have been on board of directors, always tried to contribute in one way or another. And so I know that Philadelphia is the largest poorest city in the country. 25% of the population, adult population, lives in poverty. So if technology, and the average starting salary in tech was $63,000 in 2015. So when you start talking about people living in poverty, you're talking about a family of 4 living on less than $25,000. So if the average starting salary in tech is 63, even if people are starting at 2/3 of that, 42,000, you're still clearly beating what a family of 4 that is living in poverty is making, right? 25,000 or 24,000 compared to 42. And tech needs people. And another narrative or thread in the narrative was, and you can get into tech without a degree. And then if you know about Philadelphia as well, there are, I forget the percentage of adults that do not have a college degree. In fact, I think it's something like, some ridiculous amount, 20 or 30% of adults in the city of Philadelphia don't have a college degree. So if you're trying to take advantage of tech growing and you're trying to solve a problem in Philadelphia, there was a natural marriage that I identified in having conversations with these clients and then kind of going in concentric circles and building the network. And so once I identified those two things, I went to this network of people and said, we really need to begin an organization that tells Black people about tech as a viable option, career path. And frankly, the name, the item stands for the Inclusive Technology and Entrepreneurship Movement. That's really just inspiration from God more than anything else. But it's really, the idea was to socialize tech And then it evolved based on the collective contribution of people telling me, hey, this is how you need to structure this kind of organization.
Gotcha. So you kind of answered, I guess, the question I was trying to imply. Sure. So as a lawyer with, I believe you said 16 years of experience at the moment.
That's right.
You know, some people, or at that stage, a lot of people don't want to be really hands-on.
Right.
It could be an angel investor, VC, different avenues. But I guess for your, purpose, you feel more to be more involved and to uplift the environment of Philadelphia, or what kind of drove you to be more hands-on than just be a funder?
No, that's a great question, dude. So actually, to be honest, I played two angles, right? So when I started the item, the organization, the company that I'm running right now, I actually created it a week after I created the item, because I always knew that as a nonprofit, we were going to have some kind of support mechanism. By the way, this is an old lawyer trick. There was a time in the early 2000s where whenever you created a nonprofit, you would advise the client to create a for-profit, because the for-profit could contribute money to the nonprofit. And that was just a way for the nonprofit to raise funds itself under its own control. So I was just applying something that I'd always advised clients in my own, which is create the item as a nonprofit, but you have a for-profit arm to sort of capture whatever business opportunities were coming that you couldn't necessarily run through that. And so when you ask me, what was I looking at? I think we focused on the item, and I say we because there was a collective that really drove the momentum towards the start, which is having a platform for Black people to, kind of learn about tech and then to find a pathway into tech, and then began to build an education platform. But that was very organic. But I knew that there was going to be business opportunities there. And so I created the for-profit. Now, the natural business opportunities that came out of having this, and he actually was, he was actually, a pretty prominent member. He attended quite a bit. It was the startups that were beginning to come to the item, run by minorities. And so that's where something that could have been probably conducted through my law firm just got conducted through this vehicle that I created to the item, which is, we knew that startups were going to come. We knew that the startups were going to come for either advisory reasons or for finance reasons. And so the entity that I'm running right now was created as a repository for those kind of organic opportunities that I knew would come from the nonprofit. Now, there is another universe in which, just as a lawyer, I could have used the practice, to kind of develop that. I think I saw that runway as too long. That's why I think I took the opportunity. If you ask me in my sleep, I probably would say that, but I don't think it was that conscious of a decision at the time.
Right. Yeah. Sort of sitting here listening to you, man, I'm just like, man, he's a legend. You're a legend.
No, there are legends out there. Dude.
No, I don't say that lightly, because it's like, to me, I just look at it this way, like, not only that you were really trying to attack this problem of poverty and create this way is, because sometimes the way to really help people to break out of this poverty cycle is to figure out where is the next market of opportunity is coming from. And tech also, tech was the Pandora that just, it kind of broke this barrier, so many barriers, right? Because it's you kind of going from this institutionalized space that's hinder or handpick people, be like, you come here, you work for us. But then techs come, like your technology started, a new opportunity come, and the minorities just jumped on this. And because you have a lot more sort of autonomy, a lot more flex. So you sort of really saw it coming. Right. So because when we talk about Black people in tech today, God, it probably is mind blowing based on what you think, but you foreseeing what's going on today. Right. So based on you starting this organization, to me, it's just come off you were also trying to destigmatize the concept of tech, because usually like the concept of tech is like, this is not a space for Black people,
Right.
you know, this is not our technology.
That's right.
So it's like you break that stigma, right? So can you walk us through, like, based on your experience, based on how you start the organization item, like what were some of like the fear or perception that Black people had about tech, and how were you able to really like help them see tech as a new way of building wealth and power?
Sure. Before I answer, I just want to say, not because you're remarking on my insight, but more you seeing what I was trying to do, I think is something very important to echo. You're right. The law is very institutionalized. And you're right, it is very select. When I interviewed there's a certain channel that you go through when you do well that is extremely exclusive.
Yep.
You're being invited, you're literally being flown around, you know what I mean? So you're absolutely right. And you need college and law school and then the bar to be able to get in. So I really love the fact that you identified the fact that one is institutionalized, and tech, the thing about it is just there's just no barrier whatsoever. So I really appreciate you highlighting that. So how did I break down tech? I think the one thing that I think I did was I went through the journey that I was asking people to do myself. What do I mean? I knew that being an attorney that was advising people to go into tech was going to be discordant, right? It wasn't going to make sense. Why is a lawyer advising people to do tech?
Absolutely.
So the first thing it did is I started losing my suit because I was going to these tech the meetups and shit that go that die. They're like, guy, relax. it's tech. It's not take it easy, right? So got rid of the tie, got rid of the jacket, got rid of the collared shirts, and slowly started getting the jeans and the hoodie. But then we decided to focus on cloud computing as our entry point to get into tech. And so I learned AWS. And then I actually went and worked at Linode, which is now Akamai. It's like AWS, but a smaller form. It's a virtual server provider, and worked there for 8 months, a little bit longer than that, just to get a sense of what am I asking people to do, both in terms of learning this new skill and then what is the work environment going to be like in order to give myself a little bit more credibility. So that, I think the highest cultural competency came through me going through that journey. Because when you're studying, I actually know what it's like to be a non-techie and to understand these concepts and where you have to hunt for the information, and also the mentality of becoming a tech, which is something that I'll get into in a second. I think the other part is just, I don't think I was responsible for this as much as the item being responsible for this, which is walking into a room as somebody who is tech curious and walking into a room with 95% of the room being Black techies. That did much more than I did. Meaning there's no way that, because we ran meetups for 5 years straight. And especially the first, 24 months, right, when it was hot, walking into a room, there was such energy that convinced a lot of people to get into tech that I would not have been credible, again, as an attorney doing that. So I think the cultural competency came through through just the community. And then in the instruction itself, when we were teaching the classes, obviously the analogies that you use, to make it a little bit more culturally competent, I think so our instruction delivery was quite helpful. And then the last bit is being able to, keep it real.
Yes.
Because the homies and the sisters sometimes need you to just deliver to them straight.
Yep.
Just straight, you're not serious, you got time for this, you don't have time for that, that kind of thing. And so, this last point is something that I really struggled with during the time that, I was very hands-on with the item because, the level of engagement and follow-through of the community. Yeah.
So within your whole experience, I'm not sure. So the item's still around today. I'm not sure, when you verged off or if you're still as, active with them. In terms of the progress you've seen, what are some of the I mean, not say success story, but what are some of the things that you look back on and like, oh wow, I was able to be part of this movement that enabled this to happen for this specific group. I know what Adam has done as a whole, sure, but what are some of the major success story that you look back on and you're pretty proud, like, oh, it was worth the hassle or the stress that we put through?
Yeah, so I mean, there are very clear success stories.
Yeah.
So we trained over 250 people. You know, that means 250 people actually went through our classes. Only 10 to 15% actually got certified. That's where I started getting burned out, because when you put in that much effort, however, those 25, 30 people who are in tech, some of them are doing extremely well. I'll just call out to Dion Hurst. She's at, she, without having had a college degree, got AWS certified.
Wow.
And then went to Deloitte for her first job. Is a senior now DevOps at PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Wow.
And this is a young sister, she's gotten a degree now, but this is a young sister who came to us, found us through the item, and is killing it. Another one, a very good friend of mine, Talia, she works at Elsevier, was an artist, and was making no money, was doing hairdresser, whatever, grounded it out, and now she's making well over 6 figures, doing tech, DevOps engineer. Like when we started out, I was the gung-ho tech person. Now when we talk, like literally in her offhand comments, I can't even understand what she's saying, right? And this is somebody who was doing, like art, deck, so it's just, those things are phenomenal. I'm meeting with another friend of mine who was supposed to meet tonight, but an accountant who has transitioned into tech is now doing sort of finance and tech blend, is making sort of double what he was making before. So there are some personal stories that I know about through the organization that are doing extremely well. At the larger point, I think that it was a good business idea. I would have worked it a little bit differently in terms of how I would have built support to get funding in order to move the idea forward. But merging those two, the tech and Philadelphia poverty, I think is a fundamentally good idea. So
yeah. That's some dope stories. And then just in comparison, you did mention you took that 8 months working as an AWS, is it engineer support? Or
it was just a sysadmin. So it's basically tech support level 1.
Gotcha.
Yeah, answering tickets, kind of doing some tech troubleshooting, depending on how sophisticated the company, or how the company is set up. Maybe I shouldn't say sophisticated.
No, I gotcha. And then point in time, you're like, oh man, I just need to check out, go back to practicing law, or was it just?
No, I've never had that. Oh no. I've never had the like a regret plan.
Right.
And look, guys, and this is kind of what I mean by, if you're going to a lawyer, I think the people who enjoy the legal profession are the ones who either have parents who are in the law, and so they kind of really have a granular sense of what being an attorney is before they even get into the profession, or they may have worked in business, see how the law is going to complement their business career, either because they want to be an entrepreneur and maybe having a law degree is going to help, or maybe there's another path in the corporation that they're working with and having a law degree will complement. But I did it almost as an academic exercise where I went through undergrad. Parents were like, you go through undergrad, you go to grad school. So I just went on to grad school. I would say if you're going to law school, take 1 or 2 years in between your undergraduate career so that you can actually understand how you're going to apply your law degree rather than go straight through, unless you have that context.
Right.
Because even though I was being paid very well and doing sophisticated work, I had no real relationship with the work I was doing. Merging $1 billion company with another $1 billion company, it's just like, all right, I guess this is what's happening, but so never really enjoyed it. Whereas with tech, the intellectual challenge of kind of coding and, I don't do a lot of coding, but just working in tech, it's very complex. I like the no-nonsense nature of tech guys or tech people in tech. It's very zero-sum game. You either know it or you don't. The law, you said institutional versus, there's a lot of stuff around the skill set. I love my law brothers. It's just so that they don't throw me out of the profession.
Right.
But, there's just a lot less ceremony around being a good tech professional. You can show up looking crazy if you know your stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I just, so.
Listening to you, like, there's a lot of things that, Kahiga, you have shared that's, like, really resonated with me. I know that I have close friends who like literally transition from education to tech now. And of course, in the beginning, he shared like how challenging it was, but it's like, you know, he is also finding that like this is what he enjoyed doing, but it's also like the opportunity in it. Like for him to even like continue to share that opportunity with me, it just like really made me sort of think that, wow, I'm so glad that he actually redirected himself because to go from education to like tech, it's like two different things. But he's just also see like it's one of those, tech is a thing where people hear the word tech, they think it's all technical and all that stuff. But like it's like any other field, you know. You just have to.
Yeah, let me just make a specific point to that, because I think the reason why everybody should take a tech course, and if you're thinking about a career switch, you should definitely think about tech, is because of what you just said. Tech is very broad. It's not necessarily you coding all the time, although you having general knowledge of that makes you a much more useful professional in the tech sector.
Right.
And just to give you a specific example, I learned AWS. I got certified as a solutions architect. I went and worked as a sysadmin for a while. And I am now doing tech staffing and tech training. So when I first started, I pivoted out of the item in 2019 and started what I call now Wellstone Technologies in 2020. We were selling ourselves in the marketplace as a tech consulting firm to help do business consulting and help people build apps. But because of the experience with the item, right, we were training people with the item, and then we eventually started placing people because it's just a natural follow-on from training people, right? You want to give them jobs. So we had relationships with Uber, Elsevier, and a bunch of other places. That's how our people went and worked with them. So I'm now trying to pivot and do technology consulting and going and talking to people about apps. Whereas my core skill in tech is training and staffing.
Wow.
All of the hiring in the last 2 to 3 years has been completely gonzo. Yes, things are a little bit tough now.
Right.
But I'm applying my tech skill in staffing. And I'm telling you, you know, I tell everyone this, compared to the law, staffing is a very simple business model that makes a lot of money. You know what I mean? But I'm still leveraging my tech skill.
Right.
So it's just, just because you get into tech does not necessarily mean that you have to be hands-on. It is worth getting a core tech skill, but you can go in any direction, whether it's selling business product, you know, sales, marketing, social media, staffing, you know, a bunch of different things. So I would encourage everybody to take a hard look at it.
Right. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
No, 100%. 100%.
No, just to add on to what you're saying, which is very true. Some people just do think like tech is just coding and you're there. Even my experience, like I tell everybody, my background was in mechanical engineering. That's engineering, but it's not the same thing as, you know, the software tech skills. And transitioning into the software is more, I'm a product manager, so I don't have to do any coding, but you just need the base understanding of what's needed. So depending on what you like to do and how robust your interest is, you can find a specific niche for you. And whatever your niche is, you can sell that to whatever company. So it's not necessarily coding, but whatever you love to do, you can find a place for it in the marketplace.
Right.
That thing about the niche, I think, is really critical because, you know, one of the things people ask is, how do you get into tech, right? You know, software engineer, we picked, you know, cloud and sort of this platform. There are other front end. But if you're a software person, you have to keep your skills so sharp on a regular basis. Whereas if you're in a tech adjacent role, staffing, product management, being a project manager, a scrum master, you don't have to. And Peter understands. My guy works for Meta. He's struggling. He's having to keep up. The rest of us, we don't have to keep up. You guys keep keeping up. Back to you. You know what I mean? And we're just placing, you know what I mean, or doing a project management because it does not require the intense having to be on the cutting edge of the latest technology as a function of being able to keep your salary level where it was. You know what I mean? Whereas with the adjacent people, all we're doing is let's go watch a YouTube video, let's go have take somebody out to lunch, and you're all caught up because you don't need that same technical depth. You know, and the amount of it's almost like a 1-to-5 relationship between the coder and all of the ancillary people that need to keep, you know, like the marketer, like the sales, like the HR, like the product manager, like the scrum master. So there's a lot of room in tech right now.
Right. Is that so? I'm just glad we're having these conversations because I just hope, like, you know, there is a viewer that's sitting there who could possibly think about having a career change and thinking about going to tech. And I hope that you know that this podcast and this conversation was for you. And I hope it give you a little bit of sense. Like if you have anxiety about jumping into tech or you have a little bit of fear, I hope that just, you know, you coming onto our talk show today gave them a little bit of a relief.
Sure.
Knowing that, you know, that they could actually take this step.
Yep.
And, you know, some of the like perks that comes with it is, you make the money's there.
No, the money's there.
Absolutely. But also, like, you know, most tech people work from home now.
Exactly.
You know, so there's just like, you know, and I feel like as many Black and brown people that we could push in this directions will allow us to continue to really build that wealth that we need also to really continue to like build our community, because I think it's bigger than that, you know. So unless you want to add anything about the space, the tech space, why is it that we need to have more people of color in this space?
So I think, you know, I'm going to be a little obtuse here.
Yeah.
The implication of your question, I think, there are like two sides of it.
Right.
One is, of course, you need more Black people in tech because of kind of the macro things. Let's just take it to its logical extension. All of the face recognition, when you don't have minorities on the team, there are biases inbuilt, and therefore there are sort of macro issues, right? But then there are the micro issues of, yes, we should have more Black people in tech, but how do you actually do that in a sustainable way that accrues results over time so that you build scale? And that is the answer that the item was trying to contribute to that question. And one of the largest frustrations we had, and I'm just going to keep it 100, is that
please keep it 100 because, you know, that's our space.
I would say that everybody who graduated the program was, you know, so I gave you already only 10% of people graduated. And even then, everybody who graduated they were either an immigrant, honestly. So if a lot of the audience are African, you know, immigrants, then that's it. Or we're working in tech and we're sort of enhancing their credentials in order to get more money, right? And so the frustrating thing was seeing people whose jobs were going to be made obsolete by tech, who were definitely underpaid, who were given an opportunity to learn a skill, knowing that there were internships with Uber, for example, AWS, and people did not complete the exercise. Did not complete, the exercise of getting either completing the classes or getting certified.
Right.
And they came knowing that, you know, tech, it was a very frustrating opportunity. So when as a company that positions, you know, we're minority owned, we're minority operated, we sell ourselves as this. But tech, as I mentioned, one of the things I like about it, it's a zero-sum game. You either know it or you don't.
Right.
And so a lot of times, and I know I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but I'm just saying for the community, we can't expect that. Like it's really, you're going to have to convince yourself that it is worth doing it. Nobody else can convince you about that. Right. You need to actually dedicate yourself. And once you're in the room, you are going to realize how much value there is. But nobody is going to be able to accurately explain it. If you're not inherently motivated yourself and expect that somebody outside of you is going to motivate you to understand code. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just not going to happen. And
Right.
I
Well, thank you for dropping that truth, right?
Yeah.
That's a hardcore truth, right?
And I feel quite strongly about it.
Go ahead, Toby.
Just in addition, I agree with what you said, but I do think it's a problem to tackle. So one of the things I think, just putting that out there, rest in peace to Nipsey Hussle. One of his latest or last interviews with the Breakfast Club, he talked, back in his hometown, he was doing like a little boot camp for the youth on, how to understand tech, coding, doing things like that. There's little programs like that that's been popping up in the community. And I do think within the 10, 15-year span of time, we'll see some of these issues hopefully being addressed, but won't see the results till then. But but for me, for example, I am an immigrant, so that's one reason why I'm in that. But looking back in it, I was raised out here in Maryland, in Baltimore County, Roundtown. I went to Deer Park. They had this thing called a magnet program. So I was in the tech trajectory for the magnet program, but then it kind of built on from where I was at from then to now. And then looking back, just because you just mentioned, I was like, why did I get into tech? I was like, right. There's a lot of things that can help, foundationally, as, growing up in Cameroon kind of shifted your perspective on the world. I think shifting people's perspective at a younger age can help provide the outcome for one in the long run.
I absolutely agree. I think that, so one of the reasons why I was confident going into tech is because at a young age, my dad had an Apple II, which is a very old machine, but it had a program where we would have to write programming in order for it to work as a turtle program. And so I think there was cell memory when I was going into tech. And I actually, maybe part of my frustration was the fact that I was working with adults. And so they're sort of fully formed and have their habits. But I still believe that the equation of needing employment and needing gainful employment and a career versus continuing to exist or subsist in your situation would be enough of a compulsion for you to complete the course and take advantage of it. By the way, let me say as a parenthetical, we were offering our course for free. And people did not sign up. It's until we started charging money that people started signing up.
That's great.
Yeah. So I just wanted to put that out there. The final thing is, I just think that to your point about socializing tech, I think part of it is that a lot of people at home don't have any role model, anybody at home.
That's true.
And I think there needs to be dollars invested in a marketing campaign targeted to young Black people to talk about why tech is a viable career path. And just to go down this funny trail a little bit, when I was in Philly in the aughts and the tens, there were ads everywhere for people to become security guards, CNAs, and I think it was like phlebotomists, like taking the blood, the blood care. And a lot of times when you meet a young person or somebody who's looking at a career option, those are the 3 career options that they're looking at. But if you go in the subway, SEPTA, those are the ads that are there. When you listen to all the Black radio, those are the ads that are there. So over my 20 years in Philly,
sort of get conditioned
to seeing those jobs.
To see these jobs and get yourself in, and there's just all these opportunities.
So I think
again, thank you for your transparency and for your honesty, because it just really make me think at the end of the day, the narrative, for me, is all about the narrative, right? Or like, you also get like the pandemics happened, or the George Floyd happened, right? There was this sense like all these companies like, oh, now let's take our money and let's invest in these like a minority organization that is helping to like get them into tech. And you notice a lot of these companies were giving. But I also like go back to your point of us saying like, this organization, social change organization is there. But at the end of the day, like, I love your point of saying like, you kind of have to just see that this organization is just not there to just like, I don't know, get more funding or get money from company. But it's about like, if you're going to go through this program, you want to see the end result of
Absolutely.
it. But in order for that to happen, the program is not going to do it for you.
That's right.
It has to be these intrinsic values or intrinsic sort of motivation to just see, like, because sometimes it's not the organization to make you. It's you make the program, or you take it to the whatever direction that you want to, right? And I truly believe in that, because I do think, like,
I really do.
I do think that is so applicable to not just being in tech, but to so many jobs or to so many career that we want to pursue, right?
Absolutely.
And because I just think sometimes we just quickly get caught up with this, like, minority or narrative, or I'm a victim of this, I'm a victim of that.
Absolutely.
But in this space in tech, most of the time, like, that narrative can only take you to the door sometime, right?
Absolutely.
Now, what's going to happen when you step into the door?
That's right.
Will you want to add anything to what I just shared? Because I do think it's powerful, and I want our viewers to really understand where you are coming from.
I mean, listen, a lot of this probably needs to be had off camera because, you know, we know where we're heading to right now. You know that we're beginning to adopt a more conservative line. A bunch of Africans going to talk, you know what I mean? Going to talk about, you know, I need to work hard. We're all going to have our immigration papers pulled. So let's avoid that. Well, the truth is, it's in black and white. Okay, it's in black and white. I ran an organization, and let me say this: I'm going to say this with due acknowledgement that I may not be the greatest business person in the world. I may not be the most charismatic leader. I may not have brought the right people together to run the item. But what I know is that we offered free classes to people who said up and down for over 12 months they were interested in making a career change, and people didn't sign up. We then started charging $300 a person. Obviously, everybody now complains because they want the free version, you know. And then of the $250 that came through, only 10%, right?
Wow.
And so I'm going to, and then here's the part where we diverge. When I stopped doing the item day to day in 2019, I told you that our success rate was somewhere between 10 to 15%. When I was talking to the workforce development community out there, they said 10 to 15%. That is actually a reasonable target for somebody. And that's where I realized the gap of how I wanted to spend my time. If only 10% of people were going to complete it, is just not worth my investment.
Right,
Even
right.
though it is the industry norm, that is not what I was looking for in terms of outcomes.
Right.
And that's why the private sector ends up being more. But inherently, in your question, where you were trying to get me to go, I would say that it was proven objectively over how people treated the product that we were offering, and even when they were actually enrolled and it was made very clear about what they were supposed to do,
Right.
they did not do what they were supposed to do, in spite of saying that they wanted to take advantage of the opportunity. And a lot of those people right now, they're still exactly where they were.
Yep.
And those people who took advantage of the opportunity
Yep.
are making, every single one of them are making over six figures right now.
That's it.
And it's just a very simple equation. So it's like you could go look at that small group over there.
Right.
But by the way, that's life though.
Yep.
Life is the 80-20 rule. Only 20 people and sometimes 10 people are really going to take advantage of it.
Yep.
And so now that I'm older enough, I recognize that to be the case. I probably would have been less frustrated had I just kind of acknowledged that right off the bat, that we're all fighting against the Pareto principle. all the
Yep.
time. Yep.
So now let's just transition to the work you're doing today, and maybe other projects you haven't mentioned throughout this interview.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, I run tech staffing and training firms. So, we essentially place technology talent at companies. It is the plan to sort of evolve into different sectors. You guys see what's happening in tech. Everybody, so,
Everybody taking cover right now.
so
Everybody trying to go back in the trenches. Like, wait, what's happening?
So we've added on a few clients that are looking for us to place finance and accounting professionals, move into legal, just to give some portfolio balance there. The other thing that I'm working about that I think is related to the community is the Ride to Work project. So I'm chief operating officer and general counsel of a company called Ride to Work in Philadelphia. And what we do is we provide transportation. Well, we provide employers with basically staffing solutions, but employers that are located in the suburbs, that usually manufacturing, and they need workers. In the areas that they're located, they don't have a lot of people there, so they have to recruit from urban centers.
Yeah.
And that's where when people get jobs there, we provide them transportation back and forth. And so we're basically getting lots of people to work who couldn't be. We've probably hired at this point over 100 people who are working out in the burbs at various employers, making now in some cases up to $26, $27 an hour. So, you know, as part of my social impact mission, I went away from the item, but now kind of doing it under this new space and, you know, still getting people to work. So pretty excited.
You're a busy man.
Yeah, exactly.
You stay busy. You just gotta still move into all these different spaces and stuff
Just want
like
to help
that.
people, you know?
Right. Well, we appreciate you
Of course.
really for being. We're not done yet. Yeah, because we still got a little more. It's an African thing, you know. It's an African thing. You put your hands out, we want to shake it, right? Yeah. But no, but we definitely do have more questions here for you because we love the sort of the hearing about the knowledge that you're dropping here because it's really important for us to have this discourse in a way that's authentic. So, you know, so my just last question is just around, is there anything that you want to share with us that we didn't ask you today? You want to add?
I was going to share just because this is focused on entrepreneurship. I think this conversation.
Right.
Yeah, and so I was just going to say, you know, for those people who are considering entrepreneurship, especially the younger people, I would say wait before you jump.
Right.
And this is somebody, you know, I've been running my own, you know, business for 16 years, and and just some of the mistakes that I made, right? The first is, you know, when you are leaving a large corporation, you don't understand the magic of having your paycheck every 2 weeks or every month. You just don't understand it until you go out and try to start doing that on your own. Like, you just have no idea what it means for like 100,000 people to get paid every you know, that's an astonishing thing. So just have an appreciation for that. The other thing is that if you're leaving any time before your 5th or 6th year, but probably before your 10th year, you just have not seen enough about the business. And just to give it in lawyer terms so that it gives some context. So the first 3 years of a lawyer, you're just learning how to draft documents to do the work. Then the next 3 years, you're learning how to supervise junior associates. And then the next 3 years is when you start getting to big boy stuff, right? You start getting invited to meetings, you do golf course, and learn how to land business. So if you leave before that 10th year where you started going to the golf course and getting called in for business meeting, when you go and start your own firm, you are now going to have to learn lessons that you have never learned before on your own dime and on your own time as well. And that just very simple insight is something that really prevents a lot of people from being successful because you don't know what you don't know, but it's because you didn't really stay enough. And the part of it is if somebody's paying you to learn on their own dime, maximize that time. Treat work as basically university, you know, where they're paying you to go to school on somebody else and learn as much as possible, especially if you're trying to do that, the entrepreneurship thing. The other, and I was just talking about this with Peter, network is everything. More than your technical skill, even though your technical skill, obviously, when you get in, you're going to have to do it. But the network is everything. And you have to be, you know, if you're a natural, you know, networker, like I suspect, you know, probably we all are, we have to gain a certain discipline about what we're doing with the network that we're building or that we naturally have. You have to be much more deliberate about looking at how people can help you further your goals. Don't be Machiavellian about it, but certainly understand what you're doing. And if you are not a natural outgoer, then make it your activities outcome based. And I'm saying this because networking is so important. It is what has sustained me in business and is accelerating my business success because I'm understanding that principle more. And so be very deliberate. If you're outgoing, be disciplined about it, because we'll just go in the room and just talk and not really be focused, right? But if you're more an introvert type, then plan it out. I just ran a basic model. Do one meeting a week for a year. It's 52 meetings, but if you miss a few, it might be 30 or 40, but at least you're getting that practice in. And you're building in a deliberate way. I want to build these kinds of people, these kinds of people. It's just something that's
right. I mean, yeah, definitely. Social capital is huge.
It's huge.
It's huge. It makes all the difference because one thing you realize, like, everyone, there's so many people out there with the same technical skill set. That's right. But like, what sets you apart from those other people is the network, and that's never going to change. Right. Kahiga, again, thank you so much for being on our talk show. I will sort of like go ahead. Yeah, one more question. Toby has one more question.
So I know you said you're very more, social based in your endeavors in entrepreneurship. Within the next 5-10 years, what's some of the visions you want to be accomplished?
Yeah. So when I broke into tech, I realized that I'm breaking up my life into decades. So I'm now in my tech decade. Next decade, I would like to be focused on more direct public service. So deciding between either helping any of my colleagues who might run for office, maybe do a stint in an administration of some kind, but alternatively do public service in the private sector, and that might be doing a VC to help minority companies, or ride to work. That is essentially combining a lot of what I do. It's entrepreneurship, but it's also, a business, it's a social impact as well. And it's actually a pretty complex model. So that might be it. So, but I know that I want to focus on public service of some kind.
And I think, if we ask you one more question, he's gonna start charging us.
That's right.
So we out of our free question here. Right. He kind of be implying this whole time. I get it. I think Toby still have more, but if you charge Toby, he's paying the bill. Right. I'm not paying the bill. Why you not paying our money like that? That's right. But yeah, we just want to close it out with we at the end. We always gonna ask our guests these questions, right? Again, no pressure. Again, but it's a tie. It's we keep counting of which country. I'm sure you hear a lot of this. All the war arguments started over jollof rice. I'm sure at some point you have also find yourself caught up into the conversation where you were minding your own business, but we always ask, we have all these flags here from all these different countries. Cameroon flag.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So we have all these flags here. These are all mainly, you could tell, mainly West African. No, we have some South African. Right. In the East African too. We trying to make sure that we don't trying to make everybody happy.
No, I got it. That's not a war on set.
But yeah. All right. This is Senegal. I thought it was Guinea. I'm like, Guinea flag never stand up. All right. Yeah. But we have all these flags. So which country do you believe makes the best jollof rice?
Cameroon. Look at it.
Cameroon. Wow. Okay. All right. Toby, don't forget the bell. Ring the bell for Cameroon today.
That's right. We rap.
So,
absolutely.
Cameroon.
I know that just said something. But
wow. Because usually what we've been getting is Niger jollof and Ghana jollof, but today Cameroon.
No, between Niger and Ghana, it's Ghana. I'm sorry, guys.
Oh, wow.
But between jollof overall,
Cameroon. It's Cameroon. All right, okay. All right. Don't start no war here, man.
You have to rap that. How am I gonna come and
You already started a war with Cameroon jollof rice. Now you want to start with Ghana. Stay with one country at a time.
That's right.
If you come back to the next show,
That's right. I get invited. That's right. That's right.
But so today, Cameroon jollof prevail. And for those of people who didn't know, Cameroon make jollof rice. Now you know. Yeah. Okay. So wonderful.
Best jollof rice.
Excellent. So, Kahiga, just again, I can't emphasize how much we appreciate you for coming on our talk show. Thank you so much for everything that you do for the city of Philadelphia. Thank you for just really embodying like what it means to serve and be in the spirit of service. Even though like a lot of us, we're sitting here, we've been blessed. We've been given so much. And I'm a true believer that at the end of the day, whom much is given, much is expected. So you truly embody that.
Still trying to get back, man.
Yeah, so I appreciate you. Of course. And we want to close it out with that. Folks, thank you for coming and listening and diving in with us. And just again, this is our space. If you love hearing all these amazing, incredible people that we're bringing on our talk show, continue to follow us. We're on all podcast platforms. Get on our YouTube, subscribe, leave a comment. And we close it out with that.
Oh, thanks so much.
Thank you.